Looking for expert speakers for your next event? Curt and Katie Vernoy, that's me, deliver engaging workshops on clinical, legal, ethical, and business topics. Give your audience practical tools to thrive as modern therapists. Learn more at therapyreimagined.com.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is a Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that go on in our practices, the ways that we develop, the ways that we deal with our profession, the ways that we become trained. And this is a fun episode for me. We're joined by Dr. Steve Dansiger. He's a great mentor, been an influence on my practice, and really shaped a lot of the ways that I've been able to show up clinically in the world. And I'm just super excited to share Steve with everybody and his ideas and bringing mindfulness into things, bringing us into how tech is kind of involved in the way that the future of treatment is going to be happening here. So thank you so much for joining us and being a part of the podcast.
Thanks, Curt. It's great to see you. It's always great to see you. And Katie, nice to meet you.
I'm super excited to meet you and to have this conversation. Curt has only said very positive things, and I've also known some other folks who've worked with you that have the same report. But we'll start with the question we ask all our guests, which is, who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
Well, my name is Steven Dansiger, and I am putting out, I hope, on a regular basis, loving kindness. That's basically at the bottom line. My love of mindfulness, my love of EMDR therapy, my love of working with people on their stuff, my creativity and others' creativity, and the integration of all of the above. That's the bottom line, I guess, on what I'm putting out there.
So I know EMDR is not without its controversies in some other people's opinions of things, but when I was going through my EMDR training and certification process, Steve was one of my consultants, and I asked, hey, the style of EMDR that you teach, what is different about it than some of the other EMDR trainings that are out there? And Steve's response was, we're very mindful based. There's a lot of mindfulness within the ecosystem that's built in. It's heavily emphasized within this model. And we start a lot of our podcasts not from a shaming place, but from a place where other people can maybe learn or take in some wisdom from people who've made some mistakes in the past. What do therapists usually get wrong about mindfulness?
Well, it's easy to de-shamify that question by saying the same thing that most people get wrong with it. So there's a lot of myths out there about mindfulness, and it keeps people from learning it. It keeps people from practicing it. It keeps people from using it in their clinical setting. And the first one I want to address is that it's designed to clear your mind, right? And then you have a person who tries it and it's like, I couldn't clear my mind. And that's just not a thing. Like, I'll just quiz you, Curt and Katie, and then, people who are out there who I, can't hear back from, like, how many things are you thinking of at once right now? It's got to be anywhere from 2 to 7, right? Like, we're focused on what we're doing, but there's thoughts that are, sort of wandering around, and we could follow any one of them and sort of fall off whatever cliff they're taking us off of at any given time. And so, a perfectly clear mind is really not a thing. I mean, I know like Zen masters of many, many years who eventually get to the thought, like, I hope we have some of that ceremonial green tea left over so I can, like, it's just the way it is. The mind was built to think. So that's one of the myths. The other myth is, or another myth is, that it has to be done for a certain amount of time in a certain posture. I've been teaching for decades now that 5 minutes a day is better than 30 minutes on Saturday and on the rest of the week. A lot of times people will come in, it's got to be a half an hour, it's got to be this, got to be that. And then the other one that comes in is, it has to be done perfect, full lotus posture on the beach at sunset in Lululemons. There needs to be this very, very, very serene smile on your face. And so, all of these are barriers to mindfulness. And so it's barriers that are a setup for clients, but they're also a setup for therapists to sort of say, yeah, I don't need this as one of my tools for my clients. So those are a few things that therapists and others get wrong about it.
And if I can add to this, that in my experience, a lot of times people have really negative experiences at first with mindfulness, that not only is there the difficulty of trying to get to a clear mind, but also when you start to pay attention to what's actually going through your mind, it can be really uncomfortable and painful for a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's one of the other myths, is that it's supposed to be puppies and unicorns every time, that it's going to be, I'm always going to become relaxed from this. And in fact, what it is, as you're pointing out, we're developing a different relationship with our mind and our body. We're not like changing it in some way. So
I work with folks who have probably some form of neurodivergence. I also work with folks who've had a lot of chronic illnesses. I have both of those things myself. And I find that mindfulness can be very painful, both emotionally and physically, or at least very challenging. How do you support folks in getting to that, even 5 minutes a day?
So one of the ways that I answer this question on the regular is John Kabat-Zinn, who's sort of like the grandfather of bringing mindfulness. I don't know how he'd feel about the grandfather title. Maybe he's just the father. He's the father of bringing mindfulness into the clinical world. And he created mindfulness-based stress reduction as a result. And his first population and ongoing, this is a population that's often the subjects of MBSR, is chronic pain, right? And that's because of, in terms of this myth busting, going again, that we're not going to fix the pain, but we will be able to develop a new relationship to the pain through mindfulness. So yes, there's going to be challenges. And yes, you need to sort of bring a person through a process and help them and support them. And so the way that I particularly help, neurodivergent people or people with chronic pain is to work with that 5 minutes in the office and break it down. Like we might even take a whole session where we do 5 minutes meditation and then we break it down, to what that was, what it wasn't, how it might seem like it could be helpful in the future, how it might not seem like it'd be helpful in the future. And then maybe if we're lucky, we'll do another 5 minutes and check on that. So just it's taking it as seriously as you take any other intervention that you're doing in the office. Is, the same way like I'm constantly checking back in with people about their substance use, whether or not their substance use is their problem. I'll be checking back in with people's mindfulness practice over and over and over again and reminding them that they don't have to increase the 5 minutes. And I've had folks who can't do 5. I'm like, I don't know, 2. So we do 2, I think I've had someone where they're like 1. I was like, okay, we'll do 1. So like that, and building it up from there.
Going back to the introduction from the episode and bringing mindfulness to EMDR, can you share the history of how those two kind of came together, how you've been able to bring that magic sauce to the EMDR community?
So there's the personal and there's the EMDR version, or the EMDR story. Well, I came into addiction recovery myself almost 36 years ago. And 4 months into my recovery, my new best friend at the time, the way you make friends in 12-step, and who's still my best friend today, and even though we live across the country from each other, invited me to go to an AA retreat at a Zen Buddhist monastery. And so first I said no. Actually, he said, you want to go on an AA retreat? I was like, no, that sounds stupid, 4 months recovery. And then he said, it's at a Zen Buddhist monastery. I'm like, ooh, weird. What? Let me check that out. So I went, and you had the option. You didn't have to do it. You could hang out with the monks and nuns and learn how to meditate. You also learn how to eat in silence, in this very regimented way. And so I got the lesson, and the lesson was Zazen, which just means sitting Zen. They said, Zazen, sit down, shut up, don't move. Those are the only instructions I got very first time. And then he rang a bell, and he didn't ring a bell for another 45 minutes, right? And so first part of the meditation, I'm like, this is okay. The second part was, I might be the Buddha. Third part was about 40 minutes long. And it was, this is the words that were there. It's just ring the fucking bell, ring the fucking bell, ring the fucking bell. That's all I heard in my head. And so he eventually rang the bell, and I, being who I am, I was just like, wow, that was dumb and weird. And it really, really hurt. When are we doing it again? So I've been sitting that way ever since. So when I got trained in EMDR therapy, cutting forward, a number of years, when I got trained in EMDR therapy, I noticed that there was a lot of mindfulness inherent in it. And I was just like, this is a mindfulness kind of therapy. How come no one talks about it? So I asked my trainer, Andrew Leeds, I said, is this a mindfulness-based therapy? And he said, why, yes, it is. And I said, well, why doesn't anyone talk about it? He said, well, it is a mindfulness-based therapy, and we don't talk about it because in the year that it was created, 1987, there was only one article in the clinical literature about mindfulness. So if Francine Shapiro started telling people, hey, if I wave my finger in your face, you're going to feel better, and it's based on an ancient Eastern, practice, blah, 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 that would have been the end of EMDR therapy. So that was his explanation as to why Francine Shapiro kept that all close to the vest. She just didn't talk about it at all in public until like 2014, 2015, when a group of us basically called her on it, because we found out from a very good source that Francine Shapiro was trained in mindfulness before she had her experience in her walk in the park, where she then developed EMDR therapy. And she got trained by Stephen Levine, a very prominent Buddhist teacher. And so I then also looked, when I was talking to Andrew, I looked at the language that's in the protocol, which you're very familiar with, which is, what are you noticing now? Those are mindfulness words. And notice that, go with that. And the whole basis of the bilateral and then the reports, all of that is a mindfulness exercise. It's a constant invitation into the present for the person who is going through the experience, to be in the present while noticing the past. They're not floating around in the past like an exposure. They're one step away from it, or two steps away from it. So last thing I could say is there's a lot of, besides what I just mentioned, there's a lot of implicit and explicit mindfulness in the protocol. And so it's just a matter of bringing the implicit up above the waterline and using the explicit as it's written. And you get to where you're going. And the mindfulness basis is clear.
So with EMDR as a trauma treatment, I know that it gets expanded out into treating a lot of other things, but a lot of Shapiro's research being around PTSD and trauma. The integration, the preparation for this is not only, hey, come in, talk about your trauma sorts of things, but it is learning a very new skill set. And sometimes when I'm doing consultations with people who are just learning EMDR and talking about that preparation phase, it's almost kind of the metaphor I use sometimes is it's almost like Karate Kid with, let's teach you some skills that are going to be helpful a little bit later. And let's learn some mindfulness to be able to be prepared for facing some of the worst parts of your history here. In your experience and in introducing this not only to your clients, but when you do EMDR trainings, how do you talk about this integration really being able to work in trauma treatment?
Well, I like the way that you just phrased it. And in addition to that, it's looking at it from the 3-phase model of trauma treatment, the Piaget triphasic model, which is, that treatment has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's stabilization, and then there's, the shifting of the memories through the work. And then there's relapse prevention and all of that. And that all 3 of those need to be there. So framing the resourcing and the mindfulness through that lens helps me to help clients and trainees to not be kind of spooked by what it is that we're talking about with mindfulness. If we're not only looking at it as it's, in the most obvious way, which is actually, to me, the most obvious way is that it's, the stabilization and the resourcing that it provides, and that people can get some symptom relief before they even get to reprocessing through using, mindfulness, and start to be able to titrate into an ability to sit with distress and sit with pain and then get to the other side of it, which is, a victory in recovery. And then that may be less obvious, but it's the part you brought up, is that the mindfulness actually helps people to become better reprocessors. So these same skills that I'm giving you to bring you symptom relief are the same skills that are going to help you to get through the trauma reprocessing. And so it's not just this exercise we're going through is not just like how can I soothe myself? It's how can I get through that difficulty in a way that allows me to land on the other side, where I now have this skill to maintain, so that these are lifelong skills. So that's the other, treatment has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You seem like a very nice person, but I don't plan on having you on my couch, forever. And that when you leave here, you'll have these skills and they'll be meaningful and useful the same way they were meaningful and useful to prepare to do trauma reprocessing and in the trauma reprocessing. So that's a little bit about that.
And this seems like something that's nearly impossible to do unless you are engaging in your own mindfulness practice as the therapist in these situations.
Well, and that is, sort of, it's that thing at this point, having been a practitioner for 35 years, it's not that I don't understand how someone does it without it. It's just that I don't understand how someone does it without, I've been doing it for so long, I don't know another way. So I hope I'm not being, it's got to be like this, but it's more like, if you're trying to dole out mindfulness to folks and you don't have your own practice, it's not going to necessarily land, because our clients know what's up. Our clients know what we're doing and what we're not doing, just through their own sixth sense kind of thing. So, and for me to say, do this thing, and I don't do it, it's not that has to be the way it is for all of therapy, but in terms of giving a skill like that, I think it's important that we know it intimately ourselves.
And it seems like so many trauma survivors are very well attuned to when we're full of shit. And so I think we have to really walk our talk when we're working with, especially with trauma survivors. Moving into technology, it's been a little special, special interest of mine. It seems like, I know that there's tapping machines, there's different things that are part of EMDR, but it seems like there's advances that are happening there that maybe you can share with us.
Well, in general, there are advances where more and more, virtual and Bluetooth options are becoming available. I mean, in the beginning, there were light bars, and there still are, wired light bars and tappers. And usually those tappers also have an audio outlet so that you have the ability to do eye movements or audio tones or taps back and forth. And so I was involved in a tech project a lot of years ago where I was invited to try and help create a Fitbit for the emotions. And it was a lot of years ago. And we put that all together, and we were about to launch, and the Apple Watch came out and killed all the little baby wearable companies at the time. It was very
Oh,
sad.
no.
It was bad. But, I'm not really a tech person by nature. And so I was just like, all right, that was that adventure. Then a few years later, I got a call from the CEO of that company, and they said, I've got something else I want to show you. And what they had was footwear. It was, designed for entertainment first. It was designed by a drummer producer who wanted to feel like he was at a live show no matter where he was. And first thing he did was try to build a full body suit, which he realized that it'd be too hot and very expensive. And one day he was in the studio and he felt it just through his feet, and he felt immersion, like headphones and through the feet. So he went out, he bought a pair of Air Jordans, started sticking wires in it. And a few years later, he had a prototype. And then a couple of years later, they had a product. And so I was invited in to try the product. And they put on the song. I was a punk rock drummer. It was my first career. And so they were asking me, what do you think as a drummer and as a therapist? And so I heard Bob O'Reilly, the Who song, and I felt like I was inside Keith Moon's body, and I could feel like full immersion of music, and I lost my mind. And when she asked, what do you think of it? I'm like, well, you clearly saw me running around the room going, oh my God, I think it's great. And I said, and I don't want to listen to music any other way. And I think we can heal people with these. And so the idea was like, this is the best EMDR equipment ever. I've got like EMDR equipment on my feet, and, we can do the bilateral, and we can also do the resourcing at the end, 10 minutes of whatever sound, vibration, music, etc. And so that started my journey with that. And eventually I came to own the patents, and along with a group of investors. And the idea there too was, like it was obvious to me that it was EMDR equipment. And then I thought also, there's a lot of people out there in other fields or whatever and smarter than me that would know what else to do with this to heal people, right? Sound and vibration, music, people talk about it all the time. And so, that led to eventually, we're addressing other things with it as well, besides, the obvious to me, EMDR value. The other thing is that I started using it in my office, testing out this theory that it was good. And one of my clients very early on said, ew, gross. Who had these shoes on before me? I'm not putting these on, which is a response. Like my thing is I have a high threshold of gross. So like, I just didn't think it all the way through. And so I was like, oh yeah, I guess we got to do something about this. So I gave the engineers a drawing in my way of drawing, which is like, stick figures of a platform, like where you could get the same effect putting your feet on the platform, even with your shoes still on. And they built that. And so that exists, and it has light bars on it. So you can do EMDR therapy with the lights as well. And there's a bunch of other manifestations. Like we've been able to shrink the shoe down into an insole that can go into any shoe. So that'll come out, and we'll also put out like a soccer slide with the insole in it. So anyway, that's what we're working on. And it's put me in touch with a lot of other people working on a lot of exciting things too.
Need dynamic, knowledgeable speakers for your next event, training, or conference? Curt Widhelm, that's me, and Katie Vernoy, that's her, bring real-world expertise to every presentation, covering topics like supervision, private practice growth, and therapist burnout. Our workshops are interactive, insightful, and packed with actionable strategies to help modern therapists succeed.
Whether you're planning a team training or a large-scale event, Curt and I deliver high-impact learning experiences tailored to your needs. Book us today. Visit therapyreimagined.com to learn more.
Full disclosure, I am one of the investors in Steve's work here. It's something that I've seen the shoes. I've got that light up sort of experience with it too. It is awesome. And as an investor, I know that part of what's going on in this world is a lot of research around how this is coming out. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So the research is in its early phases, and it includes the EMDR therapy. It includes on PTSD, on anxiety, on TBI and addiction. And then the people smarter than me part, a couple of folks came forward and said they wanted to try and see what the effects would be on Parkinson's, because music and sound and vibration and rhythm are all part of Parkinson's treatment. So there's some studies going on in that regard. And then the other studies that we're hoping to fire up sooner than later involve other diagnoses or difficulties where music is implicated, where music, sound, and or vibration is implicated. So autism, Alzheimer's. There's a book called Music and Mind, just came out probably about 6 months ago. It's edited by the opera singer Renee Fleming, and it is all of the music therapy research and all the music and sound and vibration research that's out there. It's a pretty thick volume. And one of the things that I found most interesting about it is that 90% of the research, I just made up a number, so that's not good when you're talking about research, but a large number of it is since 2017, meaning that people have looked into this before, but now they're really starting to look into it. So, basically what I do is I give the shoes or the equivalent to someone in another field and say, what would you do with these? And I usually get an answer. So, I'm hoping that the research, continues to grow, including, like, for instance, once I gave it to an ICU doctor, an ICU researcher. And I said, what would you do with these? He said, oh, I need these really badly. I'm like, why? And he said, well, I want you to put it in a sock, and I wanted to be able to put it on my ICU patients because my biggest problem in the ICU is mental health. That, they're there, they're contemplating their mortality, they're in pain, they're lonely a lot of the time, limited visiting hours, like all that. And so I would love to have them there. So that's just an example. I want to be able to serve, all those different, sectors, because we're also trying to serve all the sectors in entertainment, because there's a lot of entertainment possibilities with the tech, but the healing and the wellness, that is of most compelling to me, although there's a lot of crossover.
When you're working in kind of the products of mental health, it seems like a very different process and skill set than being a clinician. What is it like owning a wearable, patent for a wearable, and what does that mean as far as how you take it to market, how you do the research? Like, it seems like it's a very different skill set than being a clinician.
Yeah, it's really, to use a really weak word, it's really weird. And I'm still getting used to it. It's like still an ongoing process of like, what is this? And the main event of it all is that I'm a co-founder, and we for a long while we had a chief science officer, and we're going to bring on someone else, in other words, I'm not going to be that primary person because I'm not a researcher as much as I'm a practitioner. So, most of what I can really bring to the table is my excitement and my desire to heal people. And I seem to have a decent ability to build teams, to bring people together. So it's mostly been about doing that work, has been about relying on the amazing group of experts that we've put together. And when I say we, I mean all of us, like everyone from the core executive team to the investors to, like people are bringing people to the table all the time. And, just selfishly, the fact that it's also entertainment tech is really fun for me because I've been out of the entertainment business for a lot of years. I haven't been officially like in a band or anything like that since like 1998. So I'm now surrounded by creatives again. And I actually was, raised, my dad had a very eclectic music taste, and it included musical theater. And I lived in New York. And so we used to go to Broadway, and I saw Grease when it came out. That's how old I am. I saw The Wiz when it came out, And so a lot of what we're doing, we also have this version of the tech that also will become a healthcare wellness piece it's a floor mat. And it's basically like tiles that you can put on the floor. And, you put them at the Broadway theater, where we have investors from Broadway and we have folks, advisors because of that on Broadway. And we're seeking to put it into, theater spaces. But those floor mats could also be used at sensory rooms, could be used at spas. There's lots of waiting rooms. There's just all sorts of possible manifestations.
It seems very exciting. It seems like a lot of fun to be able to go into something that is definitely relevant both to your current and previous professions, and that has such an opportunity for creativity, for connecting with people in a different way. I think oftentimes we can be very isolated in our little rooms doing our work, and so being able to think so outside of the box and really help move our profession into the future. It seems really exciting to be able to do that.
Well, thanks. It is fun. It is exciting. And it's also stressful.
No doubt.
No, stressful, but it's okay.
With so many applications for the tech that you're working on, is there any concern about it being kind of diminished within the healthcare community as far as like, you're just, you're bringing in bells and whistles and, what was the original criticism of EMDR is, this isn't new, it's, repackaged other stuff. But is there concern that that's going to be the response from the healthcare industry when it comes to all of these other really cool things that you and I have seen, but it just being kind of poo-pooed as, that's just everyday stuff that you're bringing in here?
I see it as a distinct possibility because people love to do that to stuff.
There's always haters.
Yeah, the haters are always around. I think that this approach, because here's the thing, is that it's related, it's not an exact hit here, but, if we said this is everything for everyone, that would, that's what makes it so that people are just like, no, it isn't, and by going to the individuals and going to the individual communities and saying, what would you do with this? And then here's the thing, Curt, is like, and this happened with the original company that owned the patents, is that the only way to get people really to understand it was to have them put them on their feet, right? And then once they do that, the haters usually become like converts or, whatever, like they'll see the value through their own experience. And like that, I guess that's my skew, right? Is like, I feel like, a personal experience is the greatest, the greatest way to get from one place to the other around that or any other thing.
So the only way to get to be a convert, or one of the ways that you think is going to get folks to be a convert, is trying them on. I picture you or folks in your team doing the conference roadshow, having to make sure that they're tabling at every single big therapist conference so that folks can actually get on board. Because I think any type of advancement, a lot of clinicians really get worried about. This one isn't, hey, they're going to steal our jobs like all the AI stuff, but it is something where people do get pretty cautious about that. And so it seems like being able to design both for the eventual use, but also the hopefully hundreds and hundreds of clinicians who are going to try them on in a conference booth. There's just so much into it. It feels very complex. And so it sounds like you've set up a team that has the expertise. I think there's all of the development and research expertise. And then there's also, it's a product that will need to be manufactured and shipped. And so there's all of the product pieces too. So yeah, it sounds pretty stressful. I can see where that's coming from, but it also sounds like it's super exciting and just a way to get into a different space and provide a new mechanism of healing.
Yeah, we pointed at the EMDR community, not just because it's my community and it's my knowledge base, but also because that was the first most obvious use for it that I could see. and that there's some research and experience. There's 30 years of people using machines to provide bilateral stimulation. So at the very least, it's a new bilateral stimulation machine. And then in terms of the resourcing possibilities, sound, vibration, music, it's anecdotally and research-wise, that is a powerful, powerful, powerful intervention. And and then the fact that it's coming through the feet, the idea that we're helping to ground someone literally at the end of a session. These are just, sort of case study style sort of possibilities. And we have done a little of the conference circuit, and it went very well. People, we did it a number of years ago at EMDR in Orange County when it was the previous company. And that got a lot of attention. And we're going to do it again at EMDR in Orange County 2025. It's happening here. But yeah, we've been to a few conferences and people, pulled out their credit cards, but we weren't ready to take them. So
for those who can't make it to the EMDR conference, where can people find out more about this and all of the other wonderful stuff that you're doing?
Well, the center of all things would be drdansiger.com. I mean, that's where you can find me. You can find information about EMDR trainings. If you're not trained in EMDR yet and you'd like to do it in a mindfulness space, would love to have you. The products are at haptechholdings.com. The brand name, it's looking like it's going to be Newground, but we're still under the holding company name. I mean, you can see a little bit of what's going on there. And then I've written some books. The last couple were both with Jamie Marich, Healing Addiction with EMDR Therapy. If you're an EMDR therapist, you might be interested in that. And also EMDR Therapy and Mindfulness for Trauma-Focused Care is another one, the EMDR Therapy. Jamie wrote a book called Trauma and the 12 Steps, and I wrote a meditation reader and a step workbook with her for that. So that's another thing that might be of interest to some folks.
And we will include links to all of those, including some of the episodes that we've had with Jamie on the podcast. And you can find those over in our show notes at mtsgpodcast.com. Follow us on our social media for updates and join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on with the conversation. And until next time, I'm Curt with Katie Vernoy and Dr. Steve Dansiger. Want expert training for your team or event? Katie and I offer engaging workshops with real-world strategies for modern therapists. Visit therapyreimagined.com to learn more and book today.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.